Feminist theatre is a term that describes the theatre that developed in various parts of the world during the 1960s and 70s as a result of the coming together of various postmodern experimental theatre movements, the feminist movement, and the counterculture movement. Theatre traditionally, right from the ancient ages of classical drama through the age of Renaissance in various countries, right down to the 20th century, has been predominated by the presence of males. Theatre indeed has been a highly patriarchal and male dominated and male oriented space with men monopolizing the space in the roles of the playwrights, the directors, the actors, and the characters. This situation was changed only during the 20th century, from the time of the post Second World War era onwards. We find an increasing presence of women on the stage. Women take on the roles of playwrights and directors, and they began writing plays with very powerful female roles in it, often predominated by women discussing the issues, the problems faced by women in various parts of the world. And this is what constitutes feminist theatre, a theatre that has been quite dynamic ever since its beginnings. It is a theatre that is an evolving one, and it has witnessed various forms of experimentation and has added a great deal of dynamism to the field of culture. Feminist theatre is as powerfully political as it is artistic, dramatic, or theatrical. Its intention at the outset is to give space and voice to the largely underrepresented experiences of women, particularly in theatre. To achieve this end, feminist theatre has been a totally subversive kind of theatre. In other words, it has critiqued, dismantled, and deconstructed all the sacred ideas, thoughts, notions, traditions, and conventions of theatre as it has been practiced down the ages in almost every part of the world. One of the first acts of revisionism engaged in by feminist theatre was to take the focus and the attention away from the single male protagonist. Instead, feminist theatre introduced the idea or the concept of the group protagonist, many women occupying the same kind of space on the stage, rather than one single male character who would most probably be always white, looming large over the rest of the characters as it happens in conventional theatre. The inalienable nature of that central character, of that protagonist, that fixed, strong nature of the character's personality gives way to a lot of fragmented identities here. You have a fluidity of identities rather than one fixed identity that can be attributed to a person. So, this is very much in keeping with postmodern ideas, postmodern non essentialist ideas. So, that is one of the major features of feminist theatre. Just as feminist theatre rejected the idea of the fixed identity of the protagonist, it also rejected the notion of the well made play. as is often picturized with the help of the Freytag's pyramid, which gives us an idea regarding the traditional well-made play, which is often divided into five acts, which has an introductory action and a rising action that reaches a climax, following which you have the falling action and the resolution of the conflict. Now, this whole pattern, this whole linear pattern of the traditional theatre was totally rejected by feminist theatre. So instead of the linear plot, which rises to a very significant climax and then goes towards the resolution of the conflict, what you have in feminist theatre, as in postmodern theatre in general, would be a lot of non-linearity. You have open-ended plots which are often circular in structure. By rejecting linearity, what feminist theatre achieved was a rejection of conventional monologic, one-sided narratives. Instead, you have a celebration of plurality, of many-sidedness, of many voices. It is a kind of dialogic discourse that you have here, and you have instead of the one single perspective prevailing over the entire play, here you have a multiplicity of perspectives. The same action, for instance, viewed from the perspective of many characters rather than only the central character's perspective. None of the traditional yardsticks of classical drama, for instance, as indicated by Aristotle in his thoughts about the well made play, about tragedy, about the tragic hero, none of those hold good for feminist theatre. What you have here is a group of women who are engaged in the struggle of life and who are in no way perfect. They are flawed characters with their own weaknesses and with their own errors, and um, the uh, idea of a very wholesome kind of person as the protagonist of the play is something that is rejected outright by the playwrights of feminist theatre. In keeping with the multiple identities of the characters in these plays, characters who are never fixed or who do not behave in a preordained manner as it happens in traditional drama, what you have here is a lot of cross dressing. The actors engage in a lot of cross dressing, and the same actors reappear in various scenes of the play, enacting the roles of various characters. So that adds to that element of fluidity. A play might have maybe 15 characters, but there would only be 7 or 8 actors who perform each one of these roles. So feminist plays are basically revisionist plays. They revise the known norms of theatre. In the first place, as has already been mentioned, instead of the single male protagonist, we have a group of women in these plays, which are usually always made up of an all women cast. Now, binary thinking is something that feminist theatre rejects. You do not have any black and white categorization of the characters or a situation. So you do not have anyone who's entirely good or bad, nobody who is, too powerful or too weak, or so even the male female divide is something that is seen in a very hazy manner. It questions all these concrete divisions. It rejects the notion of black and white divisions. And as an extension of that, feminist theatre has constantly critiqued known versions of history. What is available in textbooks as mainstream history is rejected, and you have newer perspectives on the past, newer voices emerging from the margins to tell their version of history. So it is in this way that you have a lot of revisionism in feminist theatre. And as part of this enterprise, you also have a great deal of magical realism, a good mixture of fact and fantasy and illusion, and a large amount of surrealism would be part of the spectacle of feminist theatre, as you will see in the play that we are about to study. The name of Caryl Churchill, the British playwright, is inextricably linked with feminist theatre. She's one of the earliest practitioners of this movement in England. She began her career mainly as a radio playwright, but soon moved to theatre and found the time just right for the expression of her socialist and feminist views. Her major plays are Cloud Nine and Top Girls. In these and in other plays, you have a very powerful exploration of sexual politics coupled with a very strong socialist leaning. She is recognized as the archetypal feminist playwright, and her play, Top Girls, as a textbook case of a feminist play. Top Girls is a three-act play which was first staged in 1982. It is generally considered to be a critique of Thatcherite politics. In other words, the policies of the British Prime Minister of those times, Margaret Thatcher, known as the Iron Lady. With a cast made entirely of women and very powerfully exposing the problems faced by women, all because of their position as women in society, the play can be considered as a typical feminist play. Top Girls is the name of an employment agency situated in the city of London. The major characters are Marlene, who is the head of this agency, and her sister Joyce. Joyce has a daughter named Angie, and we get to meet Angie's friend Kit too. In the office, you have other members of the staff like Win and Nell. We see them interviewing clients like Janine, Lewis, and Shauna. We also have the arrival of an employee's wife, Mrs. Kidd, whose husband, Mr. Howard Kidd, was the one who was overlooked when Marlene was promoted as the head of the agency. Apart from these characters, we have in the first act of the play the arrival of a strange set of characters drawn from various parts of history. The play begins with a scene of a dinner party hosted by Marlene in a London restaurant to celebrate her promotion in the Top Girls Employment Agency. What is interesting is that the guests invited for the dinner are from various points of time. The first to arrive is Isabella Bird, a 19th century traveler, a world traveler, about whom we have absolutely no knowledge because her books on her extensive travels around the world have simply disappeared from public memory, and no other records of travel writing make a reference to this woman who braved many odds in order to pursue her travels around the world. That is Isabella Bird. Then we have a lady all the way from Japan, Lady Nijo, a 13th century courtesan. She was an emperor's courtesan and later became a Buddhist nun who traveled much through Japan. A person who has been conditioned into accepting her position as a courtesan or a prostitute, unaware of the role that she is made to perform. Then we have Dull Grit, the subject of a painting by the Dutch Renaissance artist Bruegel, where you have her representing the working class dressed in an apron and armor, and she leads in this painting a group of women who charge towards hell and fight the devils there. Then we have a woman who represents the world of religion or women in religion. This is Pope Joan, an imaginary character who's presented in the play as a 9th century pope, as the first woman to have become the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. And finally, we have a figure from the world of literature, Patient Griselda, who appears in some of the Italian stories, particularly by Petrarch. There are references to her in Petrarch's works, and we know her better through the story narrated by the clerk in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. What is common to these women? Some of them real, some of them fictitious. Uh, each woman representing different ages, different fields of activity. Now, what is common to them is the fact that their lives have been thwarted only because of the fact that they were women. The second act of the play is made up of three scenes which shift between the home of Marlene's sister Joyce in a suburb in England and the office scenes in Top Girl's employment agency. In the first of these scenes, we see Marlene interviewing a prospective client, Janine, who represents a woman or who is a woman who is unsure about herself. She doesn't seem to know what she wants out of life, and what is only clear to her is the fact that she wants to travel and be with her husband. Marlene, who was initially fascinated or impressed by her spirit and her enthusiasm, soon gauges her and realizes that she is not a very impressive candidate. And then we are taken to a scene in the backyard of Joyce's house, where you have two children who look anything but children, who look like anything but children. Angie and her friend Kit. Angie is the daughter of Joyce, and Kit is her slightly younger friend. Now, as has already been mentioned, these roles were performed by some of the women who had enacted the roles of the guests at the dinner party in the first act. And you have these two children who engage in a shocking kind of conversation where they seem to be talking like adults, but they are not aware of the fact that they are discussing topics like sex and illicit affairs and such topics that you would normally not expect children to be talking about. We realize that Angie is full of anger. There's a great deal of anger in her for her own mother, and she even talks about her plans to murder or to kill her mother. And the only person whom she has great fascination or respect for is her aunt, Marlene, whom she looks up to as a model. We are then taken back to the office scene where we have Will and Nell, Win and Nell, two of the members of the staff there, discussing certain things in the office, and then we see them interviewing other candidates like Shona and then Lewis. Again, Lewis is a character who has a great deal of disappointment in her life because she had put in her heart and soul into her career and worked day and night for the company. She helped many of her juniors to, she trained many of her juniors, only to find at the end of the day that they had been promoted, uh, overlooking her. her. Some of the men, just because they were men, were given the promotion, whereas she, who had done so much of work and who had trained these people, was just left to rot. And at the age of on the wrong side of 40, she is totally disappointed. She had given up on her life. I mean, she had sacrificed all her personal desires. She never got married, so she now finds herself in a position where she has no life, she has no husband, she has no companion, and she is a loser in her job as well. It really does convey a great deal about the challenges that women face when they try to make it big in their chosen careers. Uh, and then in between this, we have the arrival of a lady named Mrs. Kidd. She's the wife of Mr. Howard Kidd, who we learn suffered, who was in deep depression because of the fact that Marlene was the one who got the promotion and his chance of promotion had been sidelined. And this is what Mrs. Kidd is upset about. She wants her husband to to be given the job, and she hopes that Marlene would give up her promotion and that Mr. Howard Kidd would be promoted. And very soon we get the news that he has had a heart attack, and you see, the women uh, discussing this among themselves and coming to the conclusion that if that was the kind of heart he had, it was only right that he did not get the promotion. So these are the three scenes of. In between that, we also have Angie coming in. She comes into the office in order to visit her aunt, much to her aunt's irritation. Marlene is not at all happy to see this intrusion from her personal, from her family into her office. She's divided the two spheres very, very clearly and separately. And she does not like it when Angie has run away from her home and reached London to meet her aunt. However, she allows her to stay that night at her place and instructs her to go back to her mother the next day. In the last act of the play, in Act 3, we have just one scene, which, in a reverse chronological order, takes us all the way back to to events of a whole year back. Uh, uh, we find the scene takes place in the kitchen of Joyce's home, and Marlene is visiting her sister. We realize that Angie is greatly excited to see her aunt, Marlene. She's even brought her a dress, and she wears a dress that had been gifted to her by her aunt. But after some time, she is sent to bed, and then we have the sisters conversing with each other, and you realize that things are not all that fine. Joyce says that Angie has been doing extremely badly in studies in school, and Marlene accuses her sister for the poor performance of Angie. Then they sit down and have a drink, and then they start talking, and you have a lot of unwinding on the part of both the sisters, and you get insights into the truth. And one, shocking truth that we realize is that Angie is in fact Marlene's daughter. Before Marlene went into her career at the Top Girls agency, she'd been involved with a few men, and out of wedlock was born this young girl, Angie. She knew that this illicit child would come in the way of her career prospects, and in order to, having set her sights on advancement in her career, she decided to give up on the child, or rather to entrust the child to her sister, Joyce. And Joyce was, given the responsibility of bringing up Angie so that Marlene could go ahead with her career. But it was not a job that Joyce herself took up with a great deal of joy or happiness. She herself was saddled with a lot of pressure. She believes that her marriage was ruined all because of this extra responsibility of looking after Angie. She had a miscarriage, and then her husband left her. So her life is also in shambles, all because of this responsibility of Angie. And in this scene where you have the sisters accusing each other and leveling charges at each other, you have suddenly Angie coming out. She seems to have had a nightmare, and she says, "It's frightening, it's frightening." That's what the play ends with. Top Girls is a play that fulfills most of the criteria of what we would consider as the typical feminist play. With its ensemble cast of women who are the protagonists, the group protagonists of this play, whose fluid identities often merge and lie parallel to each other, indicated in their run on lines and also in their parallel stories and fates, with the fragmented characterization that you have here, and the total disruption of chronology or of any other linearity in the play, with the absence of any kind of climactic pattern, climactic rise, with any kind of binary divisions of the characters or the situation, and with a lot of mingling of fact and fiction and a great deal of surrealism, with a gaze that is inclusive rather than one that excludes characters and the characters. The play definitely can be considered as a textbook case of a feminist play. You can now take a look at that very famous first scene. A little bit I have included in the next slide, a snippet from the first act of the play, which brings together these different women from different walks of life, from different parts of time, in that surreal opening act of the play.
There you are. I'm sorry, I'm so late. No, don't cry. No, really, I'm not hungry. Well, have some pudding. I never eat pudding. Griselda, I hope you're not hungry. We're having pudding. I am, getting nice and fat. Oh, if everyone is, I don't mind. Now, who do you know? This is Joan, who was Pope in the 9th century. And Isabella Bird, the Victorian traveller. Lady Nijo from Japan, Empress Caryl and Buddhist nun, 13th century, near your own time. And Gret, who was painted by Bruegel. Griselda's in Boccaccio. And Petra. And Chaucer. Because of their extraordinary marriage. I'd like profiteroles, please, because they're disgusting. Sabaglione, please. Apple pie and cream. Sabaglione, it's Italian. It's what Joan's having. It's delicious. Oh, no, apples. Yes. Just cheese and biscuits. Yes, Griselda's life is like a fairy story, except it's starts with marrying the prince.
He's only a marquis, Marlene.
Well, everyone for miles around is his liege, and he's absolute lord of life and death, and you were the poor but beautiful peasant girl, and he wished you off. Near enough, Prince.
I was brought up in court circles, and it was still a shock. Had you ever seen him before?
I'd seen him riding by, we all had, and he'd seen me in the fields with the sheep.
He just rode up while you were minding the sheep and asked you to marry him.
No, it was on the wedding day. I was waiting outside the door to see the procession. Everyone wanted him to get married, so there'd be an heir to look after us when he died. And at last he announced a date for the wedding. But nobody knew who the bride was. We thought she must be a foreign princess. We were longing to see her. Then the carriage stopped outside our cottage, but we couldn't see the bride anyway. And he came in and spoke to my father.
And your father told you to serve the prince.
My father could hardly speak. The Marquis said it wasn't an order. I could say no. But if I said yes, I must always obey him in everything.
That's when you should have suspected.
But of course a wife must obey her husband.
I sought to obey
And
you.
of course I must obey the Marquis.
Well, I bother to mention it at all. He got a thing about it, that's why.
I'd rather obey the Marquis than a boy from the village.
Yes, that's a point. I never obeyed anyone. They all obeyed me.
And what did you wear? He didn't make you get married in your own clothes. That would be perverse.
Oh, he had ladies with him who undressed me, and they had a white silk dress and jewels for my hair.
And at first he seemed perfectly normal.
Marlene, you're always so critical of him.
Come
Of course he was normal. He was
Griselda,
very
it took your
kind.
baby.
Walter found it hard to believe I loved him. He couldn't believe I would always obey him. He had to prove it.
I don't think Walter likes women.
I'm sure he loved me, Marlene, all the time.
He just had a funny way of showing
It was
it.
hard for him, too.
How do you mean he took away your baby?
Was it a boy?
No, the first one was a girl.
Even so, it's hard when they take it away. Did you see it at all?
Oh, yes, she was 6 weeks old.
Much better to do it straight away.
Why did your husband take the child?
He said all the people hated me because I was just one of them. And now I had a child, they were restless. So he had to get rid of the child to keep